Welcome, everyone. We will get started in a moment. As soon as a few more people join, we had at least 30 people registered for today. So it's good to see folks. Good to see some familiar names and some new names as well. All right, I see the monitor populating with more people. So welcome, welcome. I heard a nice big sigh there. Okay. Hello, hello. Wait. Let's see. We have 18 people so far. Let's give it another minute or so. Is that okay, Mary and Sam? Okay. While you're joining, if you could, I invite you to say hello in the chat box with your name and region that you live in and any affiliations you'd like us to know about. I will do the same thing. At this point, hopefully everyone's familiar enough with Zoom to find the chat box. If you don't see it for whatever reason, just move your cursor around the bottom of your monitor and it should come up. Oops, let's see here. All righty. We are, how many people now are we? 19. And I have 3 minutes after the top of the hour. What do you think, Mary and Sam? Should we? And you're on mute, Mary.
Yeah, go ahead. All right, go for it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, welcome again. If you're just now joining us, I invite you to say hello in the chat box with your name, region of the country where you're living, and any affiliations you would like us to know about. We will do small group breakouts in just a few minutes to just say hello and introductions in small groups. And my name is Susan Goodwin, and I am with the Department of the Interior's Office of Collaborative Action and Dispute Resolution. Some people refer to us by our acronym CATER. But more importantly for today, I am part of the Leadership Council for the Environment and Public Policy section of ACR, Association of Conflict Resolution. This is my first year serving on the EPP, although I've been aware of it and have done some fun things with it for many years. For those of you who are new to our section, we'd like to welcome you and would love to have you join us for more events and maybe even become a member of the Leadership Council. And so next slide, please, Sam. Okay, just a word or two about who we are, our vision and our mission. And our vision is about inclusivity and equitable access. We envision a just society capable of solving its most complex and environmental and public policy issues in an inclusive and equitable way. And our mission, what we do day to day, is strengthen a community of conflict and collaboration practitioners who support communities to make informed decisions through inclusive and equitable engagement in environment and public policy issues. So that is who we are. Next slide, please. And so what we are here to do today, the purpose is we would like to engage you all as EPP members and guests in learning about ways to access our work. And our work we refer to as Environmental Collaboration and Conflict Resolution, ECCR. And the focus of today is to how to access work with public agencies working on federal and tribal issues. We also want to educate our roster advisory team members. I'm one of them, of the history and purpose of the many types of rosters and contract lists that public agencies use to increase access to and use of ECCR practices in addressing environmental issues, public policy issues, working with tribes, things like that. And our long-term goal is to broaden the diversity and mix of practitioners included on federal contracting rosters and lists, as well as just the number of federal agency users of ECCR professionals in their work. We're always looking to expand the use of ECCR throughout public agencies. So next slide, please, Sam. Okay, so what we're going to do today for the next hour and a half or so is, if you're just now joining us, I invite you again to say hello in the chat box. And then we will hear from our panelists. We'll introduce them as they come up, who will be talking about roster and contract lists for working with federal agencies. What we will hear from Kearns and West folks who manage a current roster, who just so happens with my office at DOI Cater. And we'll also hear from the National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution, hope I got the new name right, Brian, about the history of the roster, of the ECCR roster. And we'll make sure to leave time for questions, ideas, and next steps. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go into breakout groups. And I invite you again to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And we'll spend about 5 minutes, no more. Just do a round robin, introduce yourself. And again, what affiliations you like to share, what region of the country. And the region of the country question is just so we can start sort of getting to know each other in our own backyard. And so, and Samantha, our wonderful tech producer, is going to move us into breakout rooms.
All right, the rooms are open. You should be with about 4 or 5 individuals. So go on and enjoy.
Hi, Samantha. Sorry, I just changed from my phone to my computer, so
Okay.
you can put me wherever I was or somewhere new.
All
Oh,
right.
there
I
we go.
think I just invited you. Perfect. All right. Jody. Hi, Colin. Welcome. We are going to immediately put you in a breakout room. We're just doing some quick introductions. So name, region of the country where you're from.
Great.
So I'll
Thank
go
you so
ahead
much.
and bounce you in. All right.
All right, welcome back, folks. Of course, I was in the middle of a sentence in my small group breakout. Hopefully, we didn't interrupt many of you, but that always seems to be the case. So, yeah, I'm going to just talk real quick about what our engagement guidelines are for today and kind of how we like to talk about them as our EPP values. And so people-centered in that, we want to be here for you all. We want to be listening and communicating as smoothly as possible. We want you all to leave informed and feeling perhaps a little bit more empowered. We have a multidisciplinary approach to everything we do, including our discussions, like what we'll be doing today. And yes, Deb Osborne, the slides will be shared after today. And as always, as conflict management practitioners, we will be constructive with our conflict. So, if there are touchy issues to talk about today, we'll address them as in a meaningful way. So, Mary, I'm going to hand it over to you. Is there anything else you'd like to add about our engagement guidelines or anything else you'd like to add to what I said?
Nothing. Thank you so much for the intros and bringing us together.
All right. You have the floor now, Mary.
Well, I want to welcome and advance the slide. We've got a number list today that can be with us to help educate both our members and guests and folks who might be watching a webinar by video after today to learn more about how some of these rosters are functioning within the system of environment collaboration and conflict resolution. So we're going to start with a direct example of the Collaborative Action and Dispute Resolution, or CADR roster, and would thank Rebecca Beauregard and Mike Hardy for being here today to give us an overview of how that contract functions and works, and what access and opportunity looks like in that doorway. Following that, we're going to hear from Brian Manwaring from the U.S. Institute, and we're going to hear about the history of some of these rosters, and in particular, the environmental collaboration and conflict resolution roster, which transitioned from the National Center into a new home. And that's our last panelist. Myself and Colin Rule from Mediate.com are going to give an update on the status of the ECR roster. So that's what we hope to accomplish in the panel. We'll have 10 minutes for each of the panelists, and then we're following that with 30 minutes of questions and answers for all of you to dump into chat questions you'd like answered today or in the future about these topics. They can be personal for you professionally or for the field at large. We're interested in the conversation you'd like to be happening about that. So we're going to have some video slide presentations, and all of the panelist slides will also be uploaded with the video to the website that EPP section maintains for this educational purpose. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish in our time together today. And I just like to welcome the team from CADR to kick us off. And if you have questions, you're welcome to write them into chat during presentation or save them till after. We'll be using those to guide our QA session. So we welcome your input as we go in chat, but thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Yeah, we can see your slide deck, Rebecca, but not the slide presentation. It's in sort of the
Oh, how weird. How about now?
yes, now we can.
Looks good.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Thanks.
Rebecca, if you could go ahead, I think Mary's internet was sort of popping in and out. So
Okay.
we kind of lost you, Mary, but we heard most of what you said. And so, yeah, Rebecca and Mike,
Sorry.
please introduce yourself when you start talking.
Please Introduce yourselves, Rebecca and Mike. We'd like to streamline this panel and have you introduce.
Wonderful. Okay. I can start us off, and I wasn't sure if it was my internet, but it sounds like you can all hear me. I'm Rebecca Beauregard. I'm a senior director at Kearns and West. I am based in Washington, D.C., and I manage this contract that we hold with the Department of Interior's Office of Collaborative Action and Dispute Resolution, known as CATER. You heard from Susan, who's with CATER. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mike Hardy. It's nice to see everyone. Some of you I know, some I haven't seen for a long time. So this is fun. And also people I see on a regular basis or talk to, like Susan. I have been the manager for our IDIQ contract since the first one was awarded in 2013. And recently Rebecca and I agreed that we would switch hats. And Rebecca is the director of our team now. And I moved from Davis, California back to Boulder last year. So we're spread around the country.
All right. So we'll bounce back and forth and start with an overview. And not sure who all our audience is, but just to give a very brief background on that Office of CATER, which you just heard from Susan, and you're likely aware, but CATER is charged with promoting collaboration, conflict management, dispute resolution within the Department of Interior. I believe CATER does that internally, just within the federal agencies. And the scope of our contract is essentially that external piece that any bureau or agency across the Department of Interior that has engagement needs, collaboration, mediation, conflict resolution across that whole spectrum. That is what this contract entails. And so the mechanism in which this small but mighty CATER office can provide that kind of support to the 70,000 plus staff in the department is by having this IDIQ. And just to pause, indefinite deliverable, indefinite quantity, it's essentially an umbrella contract that allows for several projects to be awarded within it. And so by having this in place, it streamlines procurement because there's a competitive process at the start of the IDIQ, and then all the terms and conditions are in place, all the rates are in place, the people generally are in place. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so it enables the department to access services more quickly and in a more streamlined fashion. And as I mentioned, well, Mike, you mentioned that we've held this contract for the past 10 years. So we're just starting our third iteration. So it's a 5-year contract in which we are the prime. And the scope of our contract is basically these 4 points. And so the first is just the management of the contract. And you can imagine with the department being so large, this is a very high volume contract. So there is a lot of behind the scenes administrative work and support to ensure that all the contractual requirements are met and implemented and followed up. So that's the first piece. The second, and perhaps the most important, is actually providing the services. And as I mentioned, this is across that spectrum of environmental collaboration and conflict resolution, that engagement spectrum, including situation assessments, mediations, facilitations, all these other things you see here on the screen. And just to highlight the key facet in providing these services is that they are provided by third-party neutrals. And so that's something that we take upon ourselves and anyone implementing work under this contract, that they understand those tenets of neutrality and impartiality in providing these services. Now, how does Kearns and West anticipate and provide for that volume, breadth, and depth of work? We maintain a diverse roster of qualified practitioners. And the last part of our scope that we do is very new, and it is a pilot program to increase representation from traditionally underrepresented communities within this space. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Essentially, those 4 points cover what we are supposed to be providing as prime holders of this IDIQ contract. And I will turn this to Mike to talk a bit about the history.
Yes, Brian knows all this history, and I'm not going to steal his thunder. But and Susan knows when Cater was established, but some of us recall, who've been around for a few decades. So the Cater office was established in 2001. The IDIQ contract was first competed in 2013. Elena Gonzalez, who was the first director of the Cater office, was interested in having a more flexible, this is my characterization, this is not gospel, more flexible contracting vehicle available. She had a lot of experience working with different people in the field and felt that she wanted to have the option to have something that could be a little more streamlined and would also prioritize flexibility and timeliness. That was one of the, those were some of the reasons, as I recall it, that the IDIQ was initiated. We started out as a fairly small pool of contract management, conflict management professionals, or CMPs is our acronym. And I want to make clear that we were not initially awarded the first contract because we were experts at managing a roster. We weren't, but we primarily were awarded the IDIQ because of our ability to deliver services and our knowledge of practitioners across the field. And then over the last 10 plus years, we obviously have developed our approach to managing the practitioner pool. And so it's been a learning process, and we're learning every day. And I look forward to getting some questions. So Currents and West is over 100 well over 100 people now. So we have the ability, in terms of our size, to deliver the required services and also identify and work effectively, we think, with external practitioners. And part of our challenge always is finding that balance. But we were not contracted simply to create a roster and manage a roster. The IDIQ tasks include that, but also include service delivery. And so that's, one of the important features of this one. And now, it's our pool of practitioners is perceived as a roster, and that's okay. But, we'll find out that different rosters or different pools of practitioners are managed in different ways to meet different needs. And this is one example. Some of you have worked on multiple task orders, I know, under the different iterations of the IDIQ. Others aren't familiar with it, and we'll try and explain all this along the way.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll just share a bit, basically in these 3 pieces, starting with how do we add practitioners to the roster. It is a limited pool in a sense that it's not just a website that's open and everyone can sign up, but it is also not exclusive. We hold this balance of, well, we're prime, we're responsible for quality and reputation, but we're not turning anyone away. And so we find practitioners in different ways through our networks, even sometimes from the agencies themselves. Sometimes we're seeking them out because of some specific expertise they hold. But either way, anyone who is contacting us and asking about it, we hold an informal conversation with them, and we're essentially trying to understand these 4 pieces, which broadly make sure that, yes, this person would be relevant for this roster. So the first is their experience and expertise, which has also changed, I think, quite extensively over time. Perhaps initially 10 years ago, it was much more niche of these are ECCR practitioners. And now we're seeing, with the type of work coming through, that we have some people who identify as organizational development consultants, DEI practitioners. And so that's a bit loose, but essentially we're trying to understand, what is the work they provide. Someone was once referred to me, and they are a court mediator. and that's just not within the scope of what we do. And so we said, well, this probably isn't a great fit. But otherwise, we're looking at their interests and availability, their capabilities. Some practitioners I come into contact with say, you know, my plate is full. I'm not interested unless there's this one very specific niche opportunity that comes through, and I am an expert in that, and I want to know about it. Others are very eager to see all the work that's possible for them to be a candidate on. And then the last part of our conversation when we are meeting with practitioners is just making sure that they understand what this IDIQ is about, its purpose, the scope of the work that we do, and that essential tenet of neutrality and impartiality. And then that final piece is ensuring that they agree to the general contract terms, the rates. We competitively went after this opportunity and won it. And so we don't spend time trying to have different terms and conditions and rates for every individual practitioner. It's very standard. And then we have a database. That database is filled in by the practitioner themselves and just helps us identify some of their experiences and expertise. I know our time is up, so I'm going to move a bit more quickly, but getting work on the roster is not guaranteed, and it is a dance or an art of you know, having enough practitioners to meet the volume and the type of work coming through, but not having too many so that nobody's getting any work and nobody's happy. We try to offer multiple options for every requirement that comes through. There are oftentimes preferences indicated by the agency. You know, they've worked successfully in the past with practitioners. They want to work with them again. We often honor those preferences unless there's any issues. But we do try to push at least a review or interviews with other practitioners. And we also have done several sort of teaming opportunities to support widening the pool. And oftentimes those teaming opportunities happen just because a practitioner is identified, but the work at hand is actually much more than just a single practitioner. And so for those solo practitioners, it's helpful to be able to lean on the roster and form a team as needed. And then implementing projects, Cater is that resource for the agency, and Kearns and West as prime of the contract, we are a resource for the practitioner that's doing the work. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but this is a beautiful graphic that says everything we just did. Some of the considerations and challenges, as you can imagine, it's heavy on anyone's mind. When you win a contract, you want to produce quality work, and that's what we want to do. And so we want to produce quality work on behalf of ourselves as Kearns and West, for Cater, for the requesting agencies. It's this constant balance of like, who is getting the work? Are we supporting this widening of the pool, or are we just using the same people over and over? We're constantly conscious of that and trying to push those boundaries. And yeah, sometimes there are budget restrictions and also up and coming practitioners. And so we're looking at ways in which we can incorporate other labor categories with less experience than the typical, seasoned expert who's winning work. And then just staying on top of personnel changes and all the things that come out of having a couple hundred projects taking place at once. Mike, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think there are some of these things that maybe will be helpful for the Mediate.com team as you're thinking about your roster, and Rebecca can certainly respond to some of these things later on. But I would emphasize that there's a lot of interest in driving the work away from senior practitioners who are expensive to their up and coming and skilled and learning mid-level and junior level counterparts. And so part of what our teaming is encouraging our senior people to actually feature their junior staff, or to team, as Rebecca said, maybe with less experienced people from outside. So cost is always a consideration, where it's not simply a situation where the most senior people are getting all the work. That's not what the government is asking for these days. And I do want to go back to this goal in closing of broadening the diversity and mix of practitioners is something that we are as an organization committed to. I think we've done maybe we've become more and more aware of some of the challenges, and working with some of you and some other folks who have been committed to this goal as well in other forms has been really helpful for us, and we look forward to continuing to make progress toward that goal within the context of this contract, at the same time that we're having to meet the demands that Cater has put in front of us, and primarily it's ensuring that whatever is being delivered to the government is the highest possible quality. So that's, I think I'll stop there, Rebecca.
All right, and just 20 more seconds to share this pilot program, which is in its design stage and just starting to be implemented, essentially to recruit and retain emerging practitioners from traditionally underrepresented communities. I know this has been on the hearts of the folks that Cater, us at Kearns and West, and it's also in support of the executive order advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. And so we will be pairing practitioners with mentors and ensuring they receive some work and opportunities under this contract.
Thank you so much. It is a quick swim and a very deep conversation, your IDIQ contracts. So we appreciate this overview from you and Mike. And they will be available for questions in the last sections. If you have questions, please jot them down and we can jump into some of the details after from our next panelist. So thank you so much. Brian, are you ready? And I think Samantha's got some slides up for you.
Yep, I'm ready, and I actually have. Go ahead, Mary.
Wonderful. I just want to let you go. I want to set you in motion. It's time.
All right. Let me share my screen real quick. All right. Can you see slides? Do those look good?
Still looks like, oh, now we're in full screen. Looks good.
All right, good. All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank EPP and everyone for inviting me today to speak and to have this conversation. My name is Brian Manwaring. I'm the director for the National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution, and we've heard our previous name a couple times today already. So previously, we were the U.S. Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution. So not to be confused, we're one and the same. Congress renamed us a couple years ago. And I'm here to talk about the old national roster of ECR professionals, which is now the new national roster of ECR professionals. I also want to put in a small plug because we were talking about EPP Leadership Council. I served on the Leadership Council for a number of years, including a co-chair seat back in 2015 to 2017. And if anybody's thinking about it, I would highly recommend participating. It was a big boost in my career, and I think just a really great opportunity to contribute to the field. So just a little bit about us for folks who don't know about the National Center. We are a federal program, so we are housed in a small agency called the Udall Foundation, headquartered in Tucson, Arizona, which is where I'm joining you from. I've been here 15 years. I've been in this role for about 7 of those. Our program specifically works to enhance collaboration and resolve disputes involving the environment, public lands, and natural resources, somewhere where there is a federal nexus. A couple key features about us is that we are a unique program, and we're unique in the sense, compared to Cater and EPA CPRC or the Corps' CPCX. So these conflict resolution centers within the agencies, we have a purview across agencies and across the federal government. We do focus on federal issues and decision making. And just this last note that we do draw on private practitioners and private sector practitioners. which leads us really into this conversation about the national roster of ECR professionals. And I note the dates there. I realized after the fact that the dates make it look like the roster has passed away or something like that. That is not true. The roster is alive and well and still lives with Mary and Colin and others. So we'll talk about that later. But a little bit about the roster itself. It was launched back in 2000. The National Center was responsible for the development, administration, and governance of the roster for about 22 years. So we underwrote that through our appropriation and our staff time. It was sponsored by a number of different agencies throughout the years. So Cater, DOI Cater co-sponsored it or sponsored it through a number of years. So did CPRC, as did Federal Highways throughout the years. So the roster could not have survived without that support. We looked to do some sensing around the roster. It had kind of sat and lost momentum for a number of years. And so about 2020, 2021 was when we picked it up and said, look, we really need to reassess where the roster is at, what it's doing, and where it's going. And then I think in one of those be careful what you wish for moments, part of that internal assessment was a legal assessment. And with that, the determination was made that we needed to separate from the roster. So at that point, we started looking for a new home for it, and we found it with ACR, EPP, and Mediate.com, which was, in our minds, a perfect marriage of organizations to take this on. So what is the roster? What was the roster? Because it will change, I imagine, in its new home, is that it was, so I'll talk about it in the historical context, but what it was a unique searchable online resource available to identify specialized mediators and facilitators, right? ECCR practitioners. So we had over 300 practitioners on the roster at the time we separated with it. The interesting part is that there were a set of criteria, evaluation criteria, that looked at training experience, ECR experience, mediation, facilitation, all of that. And it gave there's a weighting system and a scoring system. Our staff did those evaluations. And so, you weren't guaranteed a spot on the roster if you applied. In fact, I applied before I came to work at the National Center. I stopped my application midway, and literally during my interview, they said, "Hey, Brian, you started an application a couple of years ago and you just stopped. Why is that?" And so that was a real question during my interview almost 15 years ago. So that did happen. It is not a contracting mechanism. So one way it is very unique from the Cater's IDIQ is that the IDIQ is a contract. As Mike and Rebecca described, that within the context of that contract is a roster. So that's one part of it. But with this roster, there's no contracting that occurred through it. So the value and benefits of the roster. So one, it was a public resource that connects agencies and project sponsors with mediators and facilitators. I can tell you, so with the National Center, we did all of our contracting. We still do all of our contracting independently. So each project, each requirement is contracted independently for us. We use the roster to identify potential practitioners that could have been in the area, that could have had that kind of experience, and that could feed into our contracting process. So while it was not a contracting mechanism, it could be used as an entry point or as a information point into contracting processes, not only for us, but for anybody who is looking at it. It was also a networking mechanism. I can tell you also a personal story. When I first got in the field, I used the roster to identify people basically to cold call and talk with about the field. So I use it as a informal networking piece too. It was this great resource. And as I mentioned, also input into agency-led contracting processes. So anyone could use the roster. That's still the fact today as I see it. The National Center often uses the roster on behalf of parties. So we use it for ourselves, but we also do work for other agencies, including DOI, including EPA and Forest Service and others. And when we often use private sector folks to do that work, we still use the roster to, again, identify those folks. It is a really important tool for us. So not to be confused with these other quote unquote federal ECCR rosters, because they are truly contracting mechanisms wrapped into a roster as well. So Cater's, I think, I don't want to speak, you just heard from Rebecca and Mike about Cater's roster. CPRC's roster, I think, is very similar, and that is an IDIQ. And then the Corps of Engineers, their CPCX also has a roster, which is a multi-award contract, which operates differently, but it kind of has some similar dynamics. Just to say that those are very different than the intention behind this roster. Yeah, so I'll stop there because I think the very next presentation is about, as I mentioned, we transitioned the roster. So basically what that means by transitioning the roster was that we transitioned the data behind the roster. Colin at mediate.com, ACR EPP, are teaming to they created a new shell for it, a new application to bring the data in, and they will manage the roster from here forward. So it's a perfect segue over to Mary and Colin, or whoever's going to give the presentation, to talk about the future of the roster. And I will continue to stay on for questions later. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much. How y'all doing? This is a deep dive in acronyms. Are y'all okay? Keep writing into chat if there's any mysterious speaking going on, because we're here to demystify if at all possible. This is about accessibility. Good. So Colin Roll is here with me today. Just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, Colin. I've already introduced myself, so I want to give you the floor, and Samantha's going to put up some slides for us to talk to you all about what the transition is involved, where we are now, and where we aim to go next, and how you can be party of that.
Great, and
So,
maybe Samantha, before
Samantha, if you can run slides, my system is slow and lagging today, and I'll let.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Mary. And hi, everyone. I'm Colin Rule. I'm CEO of Mediate.com. And I'm delighted to be working with the ACR EPP section. And thanks to Brian for making the transition as painless as it could be. I don't know Mary's slides. So Samantha, if you don't mind, can I take the screen back and just show off the website for just a few seconds? And then I can hand it back to you, and then we can put.
Sounds good.
All right, Mary?
Sure, that sounds great, because that's
Okay,
what we're going to do anyway. We were just going to
Excellent.
do a little bit of an overview, but we
Little bit out
wanted
of
you to
order.
take us to where it is now.
Yeah, so let me just say, my background is in public policy. I worked at the Consensus Building Institute. I was chair of the board there, and I began my career in multi-party dispute resolution. So I was a huge fan of the roster. When Brian said he was looking for a new home, we were more than happy at Mediate.com to step up and provide that. So we've essentially transitioned it from the architecture they had previously to this new platform, and you can check it out at ecrroster.org. We put a little bit about the roster and information about how to join, and we have some information about the different focus areas. And then, you can view the roster and search and look at essentially the profiles of all the people that we have. So we've tried to update some images. A lot of the information in the roster, I think, is somewhat out of date. So that's something that I think we're looking to improve over time. We've created a searchable directory here, so you can look at certain criteria. One of the things that we are working on actually is the use of artificial intelligence to have people come in and narratively describe their situation, and then use the full data from all of the profiles in the roster to provide some matches. And we won't just launch that. I think we'd like to test that out. But our goal, again, Mediate.com, we don't actually do work in multi-party dispute resolution, much like for our Find a Mediator database. We don't provide any services. Our goal is to try and facilitate the connections between practitioners and clients, parties. So I'm very excited about the foundation that we are building off here. We do have certain information that we get, and I think Mary's going to talk about us, but Mediate.com, we make no decisions about who joins or not. That's the province of the EPP section. But we provide the tech support. And if anybody sees any errors or anything about the roster, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm at crule@mediate.com, crule@mediate.com. And if you're on the roster, you should have received information about how you can log in and update your information. But we see this very much as a work in progress. I don't know if everyone knows about mediate.com, but we're the largest mediation website. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong link. But we're the largest mediation website on the internet. We've been around for about 28 years, and we've got an enormous amount of content here, much of it related to environmental and public policy dispute resolution. But the question is, this currently the roster is just essentially basic information about multi-party environmental conflict resolution, and then the roster itself. So we've had a lot of discussions, and Mary, maybe you can speak to this too, about how potentially the roster could evolve moving forward. And certainly we share the goal that was articulated earlier about expanding the diversity of the members of the roster and updating. So that's a little bit of a quick. You can put the slides back up. And Mary, I don't know if you can take it from here. I'm not. I hope your internet's doing better.
Yeah, Sam, could you advance the slides? Just these are, then I don't have to speak as much. This gives you an update on what we were doing at the initial period of announcements last year to our membership and to the roster members. I'm going to stay off video to see if that helps.
It does. You sound a lot clearer.
Super. So you can see that we've completed stage 1 of the memorandum of agreement, which described the technical transfer of as-is data. So if you are a member and currently on the roster, please go review it so you're getting contacted at the right location, as we know that there is a lot of out-of-date information currently posted. So that is the first stage of just moving from the past to a new home. Next slide. We're now on the exciting part of, back one, stage 2, preparing information resources for the EPP roster advisory team. We have a number of folks who have been volunteered to participate. Some have identified themselves by contacting us. Others have offered to stay on in roles and provide guidance. So this volunteer group is building an understanding of how to maintain the current roster list and its uses as it's been administered in the past. This is not a managed roster, nor was it to the degree that you heard from Rebecca and Mike. So currently, if you're on the roster, you'll receive an email if there are RFPs or requests for services that come in to the roster, and they'll be distributed by email to each of the folks who are listed. And those offerings will also be posted on the website to increase transparency and access for other folks. As the advisory team gets their work together, we'll be preparing a business plan to administer a more inclusive, diverse ECR roster. And we're looking to find ways to identify seasoned, experienced environmental practitioners, as well as emerging professionals across diverse disciplines and types of government users. It's our goal over the next 6 to 8 months to understand the structures needed for application, review criteria, and selection, so that we can update and expand the roster to meet the current and future needs that are being asked of the field by different disciplines and specialties, including new definitions around environmental justice, about engagement of marginalized and underrepresented populations, and the onset of tech and the high use of online dispute resolution processes as well, as AI. So there are changes coming in our field that we'd like to have this roster also be capturing and addressing. So that's the work that we're focused on as volunteer advisory teams, working with Colin to administer what currently exists while growing and improving it to meet the needs of the future. Next slide. And we're now where we'd hoped to be, which is to go back to the gallery view and hear your questions about what you've been hearing about. And we do have some in chat already. My apologies for my slow internet today. For this section of our time together, we'd love for you to help us get everybody's questions answered. So if you would like to use a reaction like a thumb up or a hand up to let us know that you'd like to be called on, or you can type your question into chat and Rebecca will be reading those Samantha will be reading those and sharing them with us so we can get the panel to respond. And Susan's going to be taking awesome notes because this is an input opportunity for the roster advisory team to hear what people are wondering about and what kind of information that would be helpful to you as we continue this work. So is that clear? Here we could use our time together. We have 30 minutes planned for these kinds of QA. So please be as specific as is invaluable to you. It can be specific about a certain roster or a generalized question to the whole panel.
Looks like we have a few hands up already, and
Let's go.
Alethea? I think she was
Alethea.
first.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. Truly grateful for all of those of us who are seasoned and just entering the field as aspiring practitioners. I kind of feel as though, even though I've had the experience that my university has been able to provide, I am feeling a little insecure in the sense of like being left out from the seasoned practitioners, and feel as though, how do I have faith in the opportunity that I might be given in the field? Because I do definitely have a wide level of experience even in my own personal life, but don't know that it's relied upon or admirized or considered when filling applications or filling out applications. Can you give me an idea of hope or some fate that I can hold on to?
I'm going to send that to Rebecca and Mike because they're working on a pilot that would capture exactly this nuance that you're describing. I don't know if that is comfortable for you or Mike to describe how your program's addressing this gathering of additional knowledge and lived experience that fits in our field quite well, but has not fully been captured yet in the ways we practice this work.
Yeah, I can attempt. Thanks for your question, Alethea. It's interesting that everything you've just said, I feel like has been highlighted and echoed so many times in conversations I've either been part of or privy to, and it's kind of the crux of what has led to this pilot program, in a sense. And so I don't know about your background specifically, but I'll just speak to how we've tried to do that on the roster currently, and how this pilot program may speak to that. And so I kind of see two different profiles that will say this. So sometimes it's more junior practitioners who are like, I want more, how do I get more experience? How do I make sure that I'm progressing in this field? And then there's practitioners who may not be junior at all, who may be very seasoned, which is sort of what you alluded to in what you shared, Alethea, but are, not in this typical niche ECCR space, and so are wondering, well, how does that fit when it comes to, you know, a prime contractor saying that, well, we work with people that we know can uphold a quality and the standard that is set forth by such and such association. And so we've had several conversations about this and kind of whittled down, like, well, when work comes through, what kind of experience is actually needed? Like, let's critically look at this scope. And what we've been able to do is something I mentioned a little bit earlier, is these teaming arrangements where it can be either for new practitioners, for practitioners who may feel that their expertise is sort of tangential in the field, or perhaps it's just, you know, the work requires a broader team and we can pair together different skill sets across experiences, expertise, geographies, and we're able to do that with these subcontracting mechanisms and pulling together teams. We've done that several times just in the past year alone. And so in doing that, we thought, okay, well, this is actually possible to strategically ensure that we are increasing access and diversifying the type of practitioner that is doing this work. And so that's where this pilot program comes into play. And I don't have anything specific to share right now, but we're like right in the midst of getting this started. And essentially it is about pulling in people with different skill sets who are committed to wanting to do this work and partnering them with more seasoned practitioners to ensure that they're getting the exposure and the support they need to be successful in this field.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was very helpful. And so when we make when we submit applications, would it help if we were to say, well, I'm sure there'll be other fields that would give indication, you know, of years of experience or level of season. But would training or joining teams would be like the quote unquote keyword that it would indicate, you know, our ability to work well with others and connect in a team to gain that experience?
Rebecca, I think that's for you as a follow-up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I can only speak maybe perhaps specifically about this pilot program and how we're administering this roster with Keter. But essentially there's no sort of we're not looking in details at keywords and in resumes so much as we are meeting with practitioners, building relationships, trying to understand what they have to offer, where they're trying to go, and how that may fit in with the work that's coming through this contract. And so I would say, I mean, you know, if you're applying to jobs, like, yes, that makes sense to. Oh, maybe we can mute.
Conflict roster.
Yeah, we can mute all, and then Rebecca, just take yourself off mute.
So thank you, Rebecca, for that. Clarify that the ECR roster, as it moves into its evolving iteration, will definitely be looking at the way that we label and name skills so that we're being more expansive and inclusive in the way that this is articulated. So how about we move to Jessica?
Hello, greetings everyone. Excuse me, I'm in a hoodie. I was headed to the airport, but when I saw the email about this Zoom, I said, let me go wait at Barnes and Noble so I can hear everything. But I also had a similar question. I've been mediating for about 5 years now, and I've been thankful enough to get on, you know, 2 government agency rosters in the past 4 years. So, but it's acquire, you know, private mediations solely really just from networking. But my question was similar, but it was kind of answered in that y'all will be offering the pilot program and just try. And if there was any other certifications or something that might be advantageous for a young mediator, conflict resolutionist, to add to the resume, or just, diverse, just create something so we can, accumulate more work and any direction for someone like myself. Like I said, I've just been mediating with my own private business for the past few years, and just in the past 2 years, I've made it. I've built it enough to where I can actually live off my mediation. So I'm just trying to keep living, and keep it going. So, but I was just asking for any type of advice or other certifications that y'all think would be advantageous for, someone new in this industry.
Congratulations, Jessica, and thank you for your question. I'm going to ask everybody who has ideas about certifications that you have found beneficial or responsive to put those in the chat so everybody could see them. And panelists, do you have any suggestions that you see? At this time, the ECR team and the advisory group does not have any direction. We're still listening. So we're all ears, and that's why we're looking to hear from all of you as well. Any panelists have observations you'd like to share verbally? Everyone's welcome to share ideas in chat. Well, while we wait for that to rise, we're going to hear from Deborah. Your question, Deborah, and then I'll look to see who else is up.
Yes,
hand
and
up.
before I ask it, maybe Jessica could put where you live in the chat too. That could help some of us give some recommendations. And perhaps you put that earlier, but it's hard for me to scroll back. Yes, so I would like to know if there's this nexus. Well, first of all, is this ECR roster now that is housed with mediate.com, is that available to put in an application to join it now, or is this going to happen later? I think Colin's shaking his head yes.
Yeah, we have a form on the website. So you could just
okay,
and then it goes into a review queue for the EPP section that
sure.
will look. So we actually do have a couple applications we need to work through, but yes, we are opening it up to anyone who would like to nominate themselves for membership.
So it is open to apply for now.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And the scope of the work on the ECR roster is all of the environmental work, inclusive of cultural resources. Yet it's my understanding that there still may be a Native dispute resolution network roster. And I know Brian is here, and I go way back to my FERC days, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where I used to be on that roster with Sarah Palmer, and it was sort of when it was started, but having some conversations here, I think with Mary, who helped facilitate a conversation with Stephanie Lucero, I believe her name is, but again, I may be wrong about that. How are these rosters conjoined for that type of intercultural expertise, whether it's Native American, Native Alaskan, or perhaps working in an Amish country, or with, so I'm a little bit still trying to work through the nexus or the separation, or if I applied for the ECR roster, how does this other one fit in or not? Or if you could just give me some broad brush. I don't expect to have all the answers now, but it's going to be helpful.
Sure. Thank you. I'm going to let Brian speak to anything about a Native roster that used to exist. I don't know and can't speak to its status. I can say that under the current framework that the ECR roster had, you could identify that as a special area of skill.
Okay.
But as we mentioned, the ECR roster is not attached to any contract. There is only an informational resource function to that list. There is
Sure.
no process that manages it in relation to actual engagements. It's all simple information broadcasting.
Sure.
Brian, can you speak to the status of the prior roster you were developing back in the day?
I can. Hi, Deborah. It's good to see you. Yeah, so the National Center used to have this kind of secondary roster called the Native Dispute Resolution Network. And that was run, as you mentioned, through Sarah Palmer, who used to manage our Native American and Alaska Native Service area. She's now at Cater at DOI. So Stephanie Lucero, who couldn't be here today, manages our Native American Alaska Native Service area now. That's her area of focus. And that's a large part of our work right now. But we transformed essentially what was the Native Dispute Resolution Network into our Native American Alaska Natives community of practice, where it serves a similar purpose, but it's more around skill building and skill development for ECR practitioners and peacemakers in Indian country primarily, but also for non-native practitioners who are doing work in Indian country as well. But it serves more of a purpose of networking and skill building than it does more in the terms of roster and contracting. So that's kind of the current form of that.
Okay, so that's really helpful. And in terms of communicating with Stephanie, I believe that I learned about that community, the community, but this has made it a little clearer to me about how the ECR roster will function. And as Susan said, this is not a contract. This is just a roster that is put out there to pretty much anybody, and you can. I think what Susan said, you can check off, some Native American or Indigenous, you could check that off somewhere on this roster, or you could put that information in qualifications.
Yeah, if I could just take the screen share one time for a minute. What you'll see on the search dialog is we have this toggle here for member of Native Dispute Resolution Network. Now, again, this is the data that we inherited from Brian, and I filtered the data, and this is the result. These are the people that have that flag checked. So I actually think it's a very interesting and open question if this is something that we would like to develop further with the new home for the ECR roster. Because I think a single checkbox, I think it would be more valuable to have more detail about people's experiences, especially as we move into an era where we might be able to use AI to understand people's situations more. So this is something as we brainstorm about the future of ecrroster.org, I'd like to think about this a little bit more so that we can make it richer. But obviously, Brian's information is most updated in terms of how those priorities live within the NCECR. And if I could just, while I still have the conch, I'd like to go back to Jessica's question. Brian, it's interesting that you filled out an application part way and then didn't finish it. And then when you later interviewed, they said, why didn't you ever finish your application? And I have to say, I share that experience. I mean, I got an intern position at CBI, and I really wanted to get into this work. And I found myself, I spent 2 or 3 years going to multi-party meetings and in energy and environmental cases, and I was taking notes and doing everything I could, but I couldn't get to the front of the room because there's a bunch of PhDs up there. So I didn't feel like there was a pathway for me. So when I hear Jessica ask this question, it really resonates for me. And I think that one of the things we have to do better, this also mirrors, I think, conversations that are happening in the ombuds, mediation, and arbitration fields, but we have to provide a pathway for people to get into the field. And I think this also goes back to Alethia's point. I think when you're starting and you're filling out an application or you're applying to participate in one of these programs, it's like, is this the right thing? Is my expertise, how do I package this? And I love what is happening in terms of mentoring, partnering experienced practitioners with junior practitioners. I think that's great, but we need to do a much, much better job in sort of providing an on-ramp, to get people experience and coach them. So I really hope that that's something we can do through the ECR roster. And Jessica, for you to ask that question, and then we're all kind of sitting here going, well, gosh, don't know what to say. That's something we have to have the right answer for. And I just don't want you to feel dissuaded, because I did feel dissuaded and I actually went in a different pathway, and that's how I got into the ODR stuff. But my heart is still with multi-party work. And I just feel like if they're young practitioners, we need to create opportunities for them to join. I understand this is kind of a co-opetition model. There's only a limited number of opportunities out there, but I think we need to be smart. If this just becomes sort of an elite coterie of practitioners who have great names and a lot of experience, and they're getting all the work, then we're kind of like the Shakers, who never reproduced, and then it all kind of dies out. Like we need to self-reinforce. That's part of what a healthy field does. So I'm hopeful that with ECR and ACR EPP, I hear this clearly articulated as a priority for all of us. But I just want to make sure that if somebody comes to ecrroster.org and they're not a member, they see a pathway to learn how to become a member and get work. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Let's hear from Jennifer. You got a question?
Actually, I just wanted to build on what Colin was just saying and
Please
something
do.
Brian said earlier, because Jessica, I was thinking about your question too, and took me a long time to be at the front of the room facilitating. I also took notes and wrote meeting summaries for a long time. But I thought Brian's point about also using the roster as a networking tool, it lives in a different spot right now, but it sounds like it still can play that kind of a role and a way to find potential team members for larger opportunities. And I also wanted to just mention a couple other resources. One is Ecology Plus, which is an effort to provide opportunities for the field. And so if and it is a collaborative effort amongst a couple of different groups, and they had a grant to do events and things for a few years. The grant has come to an end, so there may not be a super active presence right now, but it could be another place to look. And if you wanted to share your email address with me, I could put you in touch with them. And I think that's about it for now. But thanks. This has been really helpful to understand about the kind of the updates and
Thank you
and
so
what's
much.
coming next.
So there was a question in chat earlier. Someone, Meg, I think asked, is some of the cater work coming through Collaborant? And they wondered how to speak to this. And Susan clarified that Collaborant is a prime vendor for the cater contract for internal workplace issues. And that Kearns and West is the prime vendor for the ECCR work, the environmental external collaboration and conflict resolution. So just to clarify that there are certain contracts that work internal to resolve issues internal to employees within a division or a department. And then there's a separate contract to do externals in the field of environmental. So there are so many. And this is one webinar in a series because we want to demystify this process for our practitioners and our EPP section members. So I want to thank you for coming today and your observations, your questions, and your thoughts about what could be better. If you are interested in working with us, we have a number of opportunities coming forward. Just want to check if there's any last questions from folks before we move on to next steps.
Mary, we have one question in the chat, and I think it's been covered, but just want to hit it home around checking the status of if you are on the roster. How do you check that status? And I think this individual was previously on the Udall Foundation roster, so just wanted to clarify how to check where that's at.
So if you go to the ECR roster website that Colin featured and did a little tour of, you can search for your name. If your name doesn't appear, your data did not come in the transfer of data bits. It got somehow left behind on the Excel spreadsheet, if you will. So please contact us if you think you are missing on this list. Is that a fair way to describe, Colin, where we are on that?
Absolutely. And,
The
our motto is no practitioner left behind. So please check it and make sure you're there.
And call us or contact us if you feel concerned or worried that it doesn't appear to be correct, okay? And if we could move back to the slides, I have some follow-up next steps that will help people see where to be involved in the substantive conversations that will be happening. So this is a series. We had an ethics and guidelines webinar hosted by Kelly Wilder from the Environment and Public Policy Section Leadership Council. That's online and available for your viewing. At the beginning of the year in January, we also held an earlier one on accountability, and our prior year's Rob Williams Award winner hosted that conversation. Today's webinar and all these PowerPoints will be posted on that same EPP website for continued access and learning. And you all as participants today will be sent invites to save the date or participate in the upcoming business meeting that the EPP section will hold on October 5th when we're in Virginia at the conference. It will be live, virtual, and if you want to participate, we can send you a link. If you aren't at the conference, if you're there on Thursday, join us at lunch. And in January, we're going to continue this webinar series. We're hoping to host the folks from EPA and some of the other federal level rosters, as well as dip into how folks are accessing and working with state level agencies who are also dealing on federal issues at a more localized level. So this is not the end of the conversation, it's the start. If you are interested in serving on the EPP's Environment Conflict Resolution Roster Advisory Team, this volunteer group will be meeting actively November through April to understand more fully how to update the application review selection process so we build the kind of inclusive and accessible resource that is useful to the agencies who are relying on it, as well as to the networks of practitioners who grow their community of practice and their teams over time. So there are many ways to participate, and we encourage you to find the one that fits for you. I want to bring it back to gallery view. I don't think there's anything more to say. A couple of thank you slides perhaps is left.
And just a quick follow-up, Mary, if folks have questions about the roster. Oh, sorry. If folks have questions about the roster, should they get in touch with you?
Yes, please.
Great. I'll post her Mary's email in the chat here.
If you have tech questions about how to get into or access your profile, that would be a question for Colin.
Absolutely. I'll put my email on the chat again.
Thank you
Please
so much,
don't hesitate
Colin.
to reach out. Yeah.
So we're teaming on this, and we meet regularly to bring each other the insights and the actions that are necessary in order to grow as we outlined in our memorandum of agreement when we embarked on this endeavor together as a community. So we hope to see you again, if not at a conference, at another webinar. And I wanted to see if any other closing remarks panelists.
Mary, you cut out a little bit. Were you asking for closing remarks from the panelists?
For the day. If any of the panelists had a closing remark or anything they wanted to say before we close for the day.
Nothing for me, just thank you, and it's great to see everybody.
Absolutely. Great to see everyone. Hopefully we'll see some of you at the ACR conference in DC. And please, we all together own the ECR roster. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any thoughts, comments, suggestions. We welcome participation.
And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks all.
Thank you.